speaker is a very dear person to me. I used to say that if Deeptech was a religion, he would be Jesus. And that's a great introduction to my friend Massimo Portincaso. And I hope you're here, Massimo, I think online.
I'm here.
Great. And I know you plan to be here, and that we're going to do next time. But this is very much good enough, and I'm really so happy to have you. So without any further ado, please share your screen and take us away.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for the introduction. That was quite, quite an introduction. So nice to see you, everybody. Nice to meet you, everybody. I will talk a bit about deep tech, but before we start with deep tech, I really want to start with a provocation, which is that deep tech is dead, and then long live deep tech. This is taken from a sentence that was used when the French king died, then a new king was made, and this was the announcement. And I think that deep tech is in a similar phase. Everybody's talking about deep tech. And I have this provocative view, but I think before we go into why deep tech is dead and why long live deep tech, I think it would be really good to have a bit of an excursion and really look at what really deep tech is, because everybody's talking about it. There is no firm definition about what deep tech really is. And that's what I will try to go through and explain today. And I think what is really important when you speak about deep tech is you really need to see this in perspective, and you need to see this in terms of the ways of innovation that have happened over the past centuries, ultimately. And it all started with the first wave of innovation that goes back to the first and the second industrial revolution. And this is basically the foundation, the wave that laid the foundation for our civilization as we know it today. It's the one that was driven by the big inventors, and it's the one, there are processes in there that we're still using today, like the Haber-Bosch process, which is used to produce nitrogen, the Bessemer process to produce steel. Those are all things that were really core, or the internal combustion engine, the radio, electricity, they all came out of this big wave of innovation. What happened is that after that wave, some innovation happened, but there was a second really big wave of innovation that was somehow triggered by World War II. And after World War II, starting in the 50s, till the 80s, there was this second big wave of innovation that came. It was the wave that was funded by the state and by the big research lab of big corporates. And this is the wave that literally brought us to the moon, but it's also the wave that gave us the transistor and the computer. So we moved from the first wave, which was really about the atoms, to a second wave where we really focused and we brought into the mix the bits of this combination. But this wave kind of died at the end of the 70s, early 80s, because of a couple of structuring the way the investment landscape was done. And starting with the 80s, a new wave of innovation came that was building. Each of the wave is building on the previous one. And this wave is really the wave that brought us the digital world as we know it. It is the wave where external innovation was the key driver, where the innovation was not funded by big corporate and the state, but venture capital was invented actually in the previous way, but it started to play really the big role here. And it's the age where Google and Microsoft, but also Apple and Genentech and Airbnb were really born. And this is the way where the bits got more importance, and we created the digital environment. And we are still riding on this wave, and this is really important for where we are in the process. But what is happening, and this is what ultimately Deepwave is it's another wave of big innovation. And why is this so peculiar in this context? Is that we are kind of reconnecting with the first wave where we really laid the foundation for our society. And we are reconnecting the atoms that we had in that first wave with the second and the third wave of the digital part. And we're bringing them together into one single entity. And this is where we are connecting the digital space with the physical space into one. And this allows for a very, very different set of innovations. And why is this wave different from the previous one? Because you could say, okay, those are only technology driven. They were, okay, bits, atoms. So what is new in this one? And I think what is really important is really what we need to consider in this setup is that what is happening when people ask you what is really deep tech, ultimately what deep tech is and what deep tech does is dramatically expanding the option space. And why is this the case? There are a couple of preconditions that are also the results of the previous ways, but not only, which is, of course, the barriers to innovation has been lowered dramatically. You can do computation using cloud. The cost of lab, the availability of wet labs is very different. Miniaturization, you have 3D printing, you can prototype. So the barriers to innovate have come down significantly. But this is not the only reason why the option space is really being expanding. There are actually two core driving forces that are, the realm of the possible got expanded significantly, and there are two real core drivers that are behind it. The first one is the convergence of approaches. What does it mean? It means that in this environment, what is happening is that disciplines that existed already before and used to be in very separate places are coming together, and you can find them in the same venture. So you have science on the one side, deep science on the one side, you have design in the form of a problem to be solved, and those two are connected from engineering. And what is happening is not that those three things are happening in different places, but they're coming together. So you have companies where you have science, a problem to be solved, and the engineering to connect the two that are really coming together. And this convergence of approaches in one place enables to address things completely differently. Things that seem once the science is done, then you can use the engineering to scale and solve the specific problem. It's not science for science sake, but it's a problem to be solved, leveraging engineering to make the science to be used. But the even more important key and core driver that is behind this is a convergence of technology that is happening. I cannot stress enough how important this convergence is for what deep tech is, because what is happening is that technologies are converging. What is happening is that basically you have matter and energy on the one side, and we have advanced dramatically the way we can understand and manipulate matter. Then you have computation and cognition. So the power of computation and cognition, artificial intelligence coming together. And those two words are really brought together by sensing on the one side and actuation. And what is coming out of this is not simply a combination. The combinatorial nature of technology has been known for a long time. But what is happening here is that those things are fusing together, enabling very new different things that today are not possible. And you're seeing some of these examples concretely. If you see of the advancement on fusion, on nuclear fusion, those are happening because new materials came together, you have computation, you have new sensing, and those things are coming together. Synthetic biology is the perfect example of this convergence. You have the biology that advances on the matter side, you have a lot of computation, and then you have sensing and actuation that are coming together that are enabling to make things in a completely different way. And what is really important in this setup that you need to consider is that really how this is opening and is making things that were not seen possible become possible, and this explosion. So the default with deep tech is that what used to be innovation used to be basically a 5-10% innovation. Then we're moving to a place where innovation, the default for innovation, can become a 10x better or 100x better compared to what is happening, what was happening before. And this is a really big shift. So, but now we have this expanding option space. We can make the impossible possible. And how can you navigate this space? And this is really important. What needs to happen is the fact that you really need a problem orientation. You really need to converge and bring together the different technologies, the different approaches to solve a specific problem. So expansion of the option space, problem orientation, but what is happening is another key driver that is enabling deep tech to have a completely different approach toward innovation, which is the possibility to bring through the design, build, test cycle. So through these engineering cycle of designing, building, testing, and learning, we can really accelerate the time by which we can get there. And each of these phases has different characteristic. You can design and leverage generative algorithms to design new things that you wouldn't have thought of. You can use different methods to quickly build and test the stuff, generate new data that you can feed back into your design phase. And every time you do big leaps in the improvements of what is happening. And this is really an important piece, because if on the one side we have an expansion of the option space in which we are operating, now we are collapsing the time by which we're getting there. So we have improvement of order of magnitude that with timelines that are collapsing by one order of magnitude. And if you bring those two things continue to compound, and then the degree of innovation is going to become stronger and stronger. And you can see how deep tech and this wave of innovation can really create something that is unique and it was not possible before. But what is really important when you look at this is really you need to think about what is in this context, when you have this possibility of expanding the option space and collapsing the timeline, what are the limits that to a certain extent you have as a company, as a startup, is that very often the biggest limit that we're seeing are not given by the technology, but are very often given by the mindset that people have when they start dealing with it. Because it's natural, if you are used to decades of incremental innovation, you're always going to look for how can I make this better. And the question that you need to ask in a deep tech environment is a very different one, is how can I reframe it? How can I really change the reality of it and really fundamentally question the assumption behind it? I think this is a really, really important question that companies need to start to learn, but not only companies, it's also true for scientists and PhD and entrepreneurs that are looking at this. This is the way you need to enter. How can I reframe the paradigm? How can reality be different? Is the first question that you need to ask yourself. And this is what Moderna did, is what if we can guide human body cells to produce particular proteins? Instead of injecting the protein, you inject the code to produce the protein, a completely reframing of the problem. Then you come to the next question, which is, okay, is there a way to make it possible? And then you look at, okay, I could use mRNA to do that. And then you go to the next important question is, okay, can we build it today? And then you say, okay, we can do it, it's technologically possible. And then the last question is, okay, how can we make this become the new normal? And what I want to emphasize here, you could say those four questions are kind of known, but first you need to learn how to ask those questions. And this is not something that people traditionally do. So first starting by asking the question becomes a really, really important element of doing deep tech to a certain extent. But what is even more important, and we're seeing this with successful, and this is part of the answer about long-lived deep tech, and why deep tech needs to die right now, is that we need to start thinking about the last of these four questions from the very beginning. This is a very, very important point. We're seeing this in synthetic biology, but not only. You have a great technology, but then you cannot scale it up, or the economics of it are not working. We need to anticipate this last question from the beginning and really blend it together, because if we don't do this, then you can come out with a solution which is not scalable, and we're not going to have the impact which is needed. So very, very important. Those four questions are key, but making sure that those are addressed with different emphasis, but from the very beginning. This is a very, very important element and component that we have. There is one additional dimension which is really important to me that I really love to emphasize when talking about deep tech. And the core point when it comes about deep tech is that because of the advancement that we have had on the matter side, we have the possibility for the first time in the history of humanity to leverage nature as an engineering and manufacturing platform. This is a core consequence of this new approach toward deep tech innovation, toward innovation. And leveraging nature and the precision of nature at the atomic level in as an engineering and manufacturing platform is really a dramatically different way of looking at things, which has really profound implication. And I love to compare the moment in which we are now to the moment in which we were 10,000 years ago, when we moved from being hunters gatherers to become farmer. This happened 10,000 years ago. And really changed the way we as a society operated. And what is happening now is a shift which is of similar importance for the development of humanity. I deeply believe this. And I love to say that this is the shift from us being hunters-gatherers of resources to become farmers at the atomic level. And this has very, very, very deep implication for the way we look at the economic and industrial tissue of our civilization, because these allow us to completely redo what happened in the first wave of innovation that we were talking about, which was characterized by the first and the second industrial revolution. Those two moments in history were really based strongly on an exploitative paradigm. What was happening is we were taking something bigger and we were making it smaller. Ultimately, it was with oil, which we're refining and breaking down the polymer chains. It happened with energy. It happened with internal combustion engine. It was all about going from the bigger to the smaller. And the whole society has been built on this finite mindset. It's a mindset of scarcity that then has influenced the way we have structured all of our industries. And what is happening now is that we're shifting to a place where we can go from the smaller to the bigger. And it's happening with renewables energy, where we're going from the photon to the electron. It's happening where in synthetic biology, where we can use bugs to produce at the molecular level and bring things together. It's happening in technology like atomic layer deposition, 3D printing, or other nanotechnology, and in general, we can really start from the smaller and build the bigger. And this has huge implication in the way our economic and industrial tissue is set up, which is very needed, because we have seen that the exploitative model that we have from the first and the second industrial revolution is non-sustainable. So we need to make this shift to a generative approach, and we need to leverage deep tech to advance this shift in the way this is happening. So how does all of this has to do with my first question that we had at the beginning of the conversation? Why deep tech is dead, and why long live deep tech? The reason for that is that when we started at Hello Tomorrow started 10 years ago, we started using the word deep tech, and it was almost a reaction to the fact that everybody was looking in the world of tech. The coolest thing was to develop yet another app to do something in yet another marketplaces. And we wanted to raise awareness that there is a different wave of innovation. There is an important set of innovation based on science that is necessary. The world has changed a lot since then. And when we started talking about it, we wanted the world to be aware of it. And I think mission has been accomplished. People are aware. The proof is that you are now on this call or on this event. So we have moved beyond this point where we need to make people aware that deep tech exists. And we also need to change and start addressing the fourth question that I have of the four questions: how can we scale it? Because it's now not sufficient enough to have and bring new cool technologies together. We need to enter a phase where scaling up is the most fundamental issue that we need to solve with deep tech. And this is the long live deep tech part of this. We really need to bring this to fruition. We need to redo the economic and industrial tissue of our civilization utilizing deep tech. And what is needed here is a very, very, very different blueprint than the one that we have had in driving innovation so far. Because the whole infrastructure that we have in place now is not there yet, and requires a whole team. It requires a whole ecosystem, and all the actors needs to contribute to be able to advance the shift that is needed, that can be enabled by deep tech in this context. And it starts, of course, with the university. Institutions like things are essential to bring together the ecosystem to really advance it. But we need each of the of the actors to really think in this way, really think, how can we scale? We need to see Deeptech as a startup which is moving from Series B to Series A to Series B. That's the phase in which we are. And as you know, when companies go from Series to Series B, they start really evolving. They're not a startup anymore, they're becoming a scale-up. And that's where Deeptech is. Deeptech needs to become a scale-up. Cannot be a startup any longer. It really needs to have the gravity and really get the equipment on the ground and really the infrastructure on the ground to be able to advance the redoing of the economic and industrial tissue, which is really needed for our civilization, ultimately. Because while we are now concentrated on losing weight, so decarbonizing, it's really, really important at the same time we change the habits. Otherwise, we're going to gain weight very quickly, very soon. So we need to redo the work in a sustainable way. The industrial work, the economic and industrial tissue needs to be redone in a sustainable way. And investors need to play a very important role in all of these. Not all of them are at par. So we need to increase the level of understanding of this space. Corporate need to understand how to deal with these. We have many instances. You know, ideally you have the innovation of the startup, the weight and the cloud of the corporate, but the reality is that very often we have the fragility of the startup with the bureaucracy of the corporate, and then this basically results in a dead partnership. So we need all the actors. We need the startup to really think in terms of problem orientation, and we need them to think in terms of scaling up university to support this. All of us need to work on this to be able to advance this major shift and ride this important wave of innovation that is coming with Deeptech, and really let Deeptech have a long life.
So thank you so much, Massimo. It's always fantastic to listen to this, and it just tells me there are billions of things to sort out also tomorrow.